Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another YouTube video. My name is Pollux the Wise, and in this episode, I have an important topic to discuss with all of you, one that I should have discussed a long time ago, but especially with those who are new to the franchise, or anyone simply seeking to increase their skill level while playing any of these different Kingdom Rush games. In today's episode, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be talking about the very important subject of Barracks Micro. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's get started. First, we want to establish what Barracks Micro actually is. Barracks Micro, or Micro for short, is the act of rallying your barracks or heroes to a specific location, sometimes multiple times within a short time frame. Now, your barracks, being one of the 4 core tower types of the franchise, are not only an important asset within your arsenal, but one that you should utilize frequently. While the damage these soldiers provide at first is negligible at lower levels, it's the time that these soldiers buy for you by stalling the enemy on the battlefield that enables you to react to waves of enemies in a more leisurely fashion than you would otherwise be able to. Perhaps the most unique aspect of the Barracks Tower in the Kingdom Rush franchise is their ability to rally groups of soldiers to various points along nearby paths. Some of these rally ranges are bigger than others, but most of the time, they stay pretty consistent throughout. In the first 2 Kingdom Rush games, we can clearly see that by investing in star upgrades, typically at around the 3rd tier, we can also increase the normal rally range of our barracks, which actually constitutes a major advantage, since in some cases, the extra range provided allows your barracks to rally to different points previously unable to be selected on the battlefield. Now, of course, this wouldn't be a video by yours truly if I didn't casually just insult most of the player base in some form or another. So to build on that, your average Kingdom Rush enjoyer most likely doesn't know how to micro their barracks or heroes properly, and will simply build barracks only to leave their squads of units wherever the heck the default rally location is currently set to. Sure, maybe every once in a while they'll just accidentally click on the rally button and marginally adjust their soldiers to a slightly better location, but in short, this is just lazy gameplay. You need to be more proactive with your barracks micro. And no, it's not an easy thing to pull off. But the real question is, Pollux, why the hell should I care about microing my barracks so often? What does this do other than make my squads of soldiers do the funny tu-ta-ta dance as War Champion has pioneered? Well, let's go over the benefits. As you all know, the enemies in each wave of every single level in each different Kingdom Rush game are composed of groups of different bad guys. But some of these bad guys have a little secret called synergy. In short, synergy simply means when 2 specific things work really well together. An example of this would be the shamans and ogres from the original edition of Kingdom Rush. Ogres obviously have both high health and superb damage, making them excellent for clearing out barracks in swift succession. Shamans, on the other hand, are much more fragile, but possess a crucial ability to heal nearby allies every so often. The synergy here is that the ogre will typically tank damage for the shaman, so the shaman is free to focus on healing all of the other enemies, including the ogre. By healing the ogre can continue to tank for the shaman without worrying about running out of health. Pretty simple concept, right? So what if I told you that by microing your barracks properly, we could separate these 2 enemy types, making both of them far more easy to deal with? This is without a doubt the most useful tool that any barracks squad has, and it's called wave separation. Wave separation is when you use your hero, or barracks, to separate key enemy targets within a given wave, so your other defenses can concentrate on other enemies. It is important to note that while you could also use your reinforcements in a lot of the scenarios that we're about to discuss today, please keep this in mind. They only last for roughly 20 seconds, and your barracks will last longer assuming they can survive a one-on-one fight with another enemy. So long term, it's more practical to rely on multiple barracks to stall enemies instead of reinforcements. But, with that being said, reinforcements can and should be used as well when performing wave separation, especially if they don't have any ranged attacks as of yet. Now you might be thinking to yourself, Pollux, which enemy of these 2 different types in this scenario do I separate first? Do I focus on stalling the shamans, since they're weaker in melee combat and easier to kill? In truth, it simply depends on the quantity and direction they're coming from. There's a simple formula to remember when it comes to enemies you need to prioritize stalling, assuming that you don't have your rain of fire on hand to use. The first thing that you're going to want to do is identify which of the current enemy types on the battlefield is the most threatening. Next, you'll want to look at how many there are, and if they are currently near any enemies that they synergize well with. If there are less of those threatening enemies than the other enemy types, then you should focus on stalling them. If, however, there are more of those threatening enemies, then you need to focus on stalling everyone else to prevent their synergy from becoming too strong. If that sounded a little weird or cryptic, Allow me to simplify it even further. Whatever enemy is the most threatening on the battlefield currently should only be stalled in small quantities, preferably no greater than 3 to 5 at most. Now there is an exception to this rule, and it has to do with enemies that deal areola damage, or area damage, in melee combat. Enemies that deal areola damage in melee combat are much more difficult to stall, and require a more advanced technique to reliably keep them more or less in the same spot. But we'll get to that shortly. The reason why you shouldn't stall multiple enemies that deal areola damage is that the more of them that are stacked up in one place, the faster they'll be able to break through your barracks. So you want to keep these kinds of enemies separated 99% of the time. Going back to the original scenario, let's say you happen to have a bunch of ogres pushing down one path, and a bunch of shamans pushing down another path. If these two groups of enemies happen to reach each other, they will be nigh on unstoppable, so wave separation is the perfect solution here. But the question remains, which group do we focus on stalling? 5 ogres versus 15 shamans. We need to focus on stalling the ogres. For one thing, there are too many shamans to stall all at once, and the ogres don't have the ability to deal areola damage, meaning that we can use a couple more advanced techniques in conjunction with our wave separation strategy. The first of these tactics is called barrier staggering, or BS for short. Barrier staggering is when you have 4 or more barracks microed to the same general area, forming another advanced tactic called a choke point. A choke point is simply an area where enemies are built up and then promptly killed by your other defenses. Only in this scenario, there are no other defenses to help us kill these ogres, because that's not what we want to do, at least right now anyways. We only want to focus on stalling them to keep them away from the shamans. The shamans will then run down the path and get killed by the other defenses, while the ogres are still struggling up top to smash their way through the near endless trickle of stream of level 1 and 2 soldiers. But going back to barrier staggering for a moment, what this tactic allows you to do is effectively pseudo-permastall any threatening target, provided they don't deal area damage in melee combat. Technically, this does also work on areola damage enemies as well, but only if there's just one of them. If there are multiple, then this will not work. In order to get it to work against an enemy that deals areola damage, this is where the staggering comes into play. It's tricky to pull off, but extremely rewarding and satisfying if done correctly. But before we tackle that, let's take a look at the example scenario that we were just talking about earlier in action, and compare what happens when we let the shamans and ogres pile up together versus what happens when we manage to keep them separated.
Hey, freedom! Charge! Rah! Freedom! Rah! Freedom! Rah! For honor and glory! For the king and freedom! Charge! For honor and glory! Rah! Freedom! Have at thee! For the king! For honor and glory! Rah! Dodge this! Freedom! Bullseye! Have at thee! For honor and glory! For the king! Charge! Rah! For honor and glory! For the king! Have at thee! Freedom! Charge! For the king! Rah! Charge! Freedom! For honor and glory! Have at thee! and glory! Freedom! Have at thee! For honor and glory! Roar! Archers ready! Freedom! Dodge this! For the king!
Revisiting the topic of barracks staggering, let's take a look at an example. The first thing you'll want to do is purchase 4 or more barracks regardless of what level they are. You should, however, only micro one of them to the intended location you wish to stall the target. The target in this particular scenario is JT. Once the target kills that group of barracks, you need to rapidly select another squad at your location and micro them to the location of the previous one. Then just keep sending in more and more squads until eventually there is a permanent stream of soldiers going to the same location. No matter how many units that enemy or boss manages to kill, there will always be at least 1 or more barrack units on the way to keep that same target locked in place. Do keep in mind, however, that depending on the target, it is possible, no matter how marginally, for enemies to inch forward and eventually escape the established choke point. Now, to this end, you'll not only need to upgrade your barracks if they happen to run out of soldiers to keep the enemies stalled, but you may also need to gradually adjust where that choke point is over time, and rally every other barrack squad accordingly while still keeping them staggered. Typically, this will only apply to very threatening enemies who have a faster attack speed, but it can theoretically happen with any target that deals areola damage or hasn't group insta-kill. But Pollux, what if the targets happen to somehow kill all my units, and I don't have any other units on the way to keep the enemy in place? Well, that's okay. Here's what you're going to do. First off, sell the tower on the medieval black market and then buy yourself another one. And after you do that, just rally the barracks again to the same choke point. Simple. Now, if you can't sell the tower on the regular black market, that's fine. You could just use the normal legal one. The problem is they're going to tax the shit out of it, and you're not going to end up with as much gold as I do. But forget about all that, because it's time to talk about the next advanced strategy, which not only involves you being more dirt broke than somebody who's like 20-something years old paying off their student debt for university, but also has the reaction times of a goddamn snail. If you're someone who, like me, is truthfully beyond shamelessly lazy, then this strategy is for you. The scenario is pretty simple. Like here, you've basically got only one frogging enemy that you need to stall, and you barely got any money to do it with. So, here's what you're gonna do. Step 1, buy a level 1 barracks tower. Step 2, rally that barracks tower in front of the enemy you wish to stall. Step 3, wait for the enemy to attack, and at the last possible second, micro the barracks slightly behind the enemy such that the enemy misses their attack and then has to wait for the barracks to come back into melee combat. Step 4, repeat step 3 indefinitely until the enemy is either eliminated by your other defenses, or your keyboard stops working, or you get carpal tunnel. And for legal reasons, if any of you actually do get carpal tunnel by performing this strategy, then I am not liable for any and all possible medical expenses. You're welcome. Oh, and did I mention that there is a pop quiz later? I hope you've all been paying attention, you ungrateful little shits, because seriously, the amount of time and lack of effort I pour into these videos, I'm like, come on, it's a miracle I'm already not up to 1 million subscribers at this point. Ah, well, that's gonna about do it for today, folks. If you happen to still be struggling, it's all good. Just join our Discord server, and I'll promptly demonstrate how to pull off any of these advanced tactics, whilst mercilessly, verbally berating you the entire time for being a complete and total utter dumbass. Until next time, tadpoles, this is Pollux the Wise saying, peace out.